Everybody, let me share my screen. Are you seeing the presentation now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, suppose, as all things go, people should normally start out with a joke. So, last night, my wife and I were laying in bed and the dog is out there whining and she says she gets up and she goes out there figuring the dog wanted some water or some food or whatever. And she yells out back and says, "Have you seen the dog bowl?" And in my grogginess, I just kind of said, no, I didn't know she really could. So, yeah, pretty tacky, I know. But anyway, for those of you that don't know me, my name's Chad Beggs. I'm the assistant DE here in Minot. I have been with the department for going on 24 years now. Um, I get to talk to you guys about the modified warranty chip seals, which we started a while back, and have really enjoyed having this as part of our toolbox. So what I'm going to kind of go over today is what is it, the history of it, the SP itself, the first few projects on it. I apologize for not having a lot more pictures and stuff from newer stuff. Just we didn't expect to be doing this one. Uh, this presentation. So I'll talk about the construction, the deliverables from the contractor, and then kind of what our results are. Um, so what is it? It's basically a concept to construct a chip seal project by using test sections as a comparison for acceptance of the remainder of the project, and then assess any areas of failure. The contractor would come back the next season and fix anything that we found that did not appear similar in kind to the test sections, and it would be at their own cost. We found it as a cost-saving way to administer a chip seal. And the big key on this one too is that we could take our staff and we could consultant staff and we could put them on more complicated and higher risk projects. If we find that the chip seal is not a very high risk type project, then again, it's another tool for our toolbox. The history on behind it is back in 2012, 2013, we had kind of talked with it with Williston Construction Services and upper management. It is kind of as part of our strategic business plan. And we developed it due to, of course, at that time, we were seeing a lot of oil field work and we were able to hire. So, and also we had a lot of work to bid out at that point in time. Um, we also saw it as a way to save our engineering costs, and we perceived it as a minimal risk. Working with Federal Highway, they wanted to see some more testing and acceptance information before agreeing that we could use it. So it was kind of shelved at that point in time until about 2016 when the deputy director asked for people to volunteer to do it. So Minot did, developed a plan set, worked with ETS to develop a special provision. In that special provision, SP 488, and whatever parenthetical number it needs to be, bituminous chip seal or bituminous seal coat special. The CRS2P bitumen, it was prior to construction, the contractor was required to submit the tests for the emulsion and or test results, as well make sure that it conforms to 1802E2 of the spec book, and then they would provide a certificate of compliance. The cover coat material is 41M, which is the difference between 41M modify M and 41 is that there's 50% fractured faces requirement, whereas 41 does not have that. Contractor would notify the engineer when they had 500 tons or 25% of the planned quantity, whichever is less, the material stockpiled. We would go out and collect the samples within the 5 days and provide the results within 2 working days to the contractor. If everything met, we would allow it for construction. Each source was tested for the aggregate at the final stockpile point before incorporating into the road. Blotter material would be used if areas were out of compliance for bleeding and whatnot, but they could not use it on the test strip. Contractor couldn't work until after May 15th, and they could only work during the daylight hours. And then they had to place it on a clean and dry surface. And then they would need to provide a log showing the daily amount of material used, field application rates, and running totals. More special provision, sweeping, remove all loose dirt, deleterious material, and I'll have some pictures of some of this stuff later. Contractors put the spotting tabs down, and then the engineer would be in play or there to direct them where they wanted the 1,000-foot test strip. And the engineer would kind of keep an eye or take a look at the minimum residual asphalt embedment of 70% with less than 2% bleeding or flushing and less than 2% loss of the coverage aggregate. If the test strip meets, the contractor can go, and the engineer will most likely head back to work on other project items or other stuff. Anyway, the CRS2P, before it can be placed, surface temp has to be at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And at the joints, the contractor is required to use building paper or metal sheets to prevent bumps, basically. Cover coat application, contractor has to flush the piles with clean water to make sure that then make sure that they're well drained before they can use the material. This is just prior to putting it out there. On the project, once they put it down, the pneumatic rollers, minimum of 4 passes, and we want to make sure that they are not exceeding 7 miles per hour. Within 24 hours of the material setting, they'll sweep it, and with any curb and gutter sections, they'll have to use a vacuum pickup. Fog seal, contractor has to lightly sweep it before they fog it, and let us know 24 hours prior to them doing that so we can put out notices on our road reports, basically. Traffic control, contractor, of course, puts it all in, has to maintain it throughout. That's one of the problems. Not necessarily problems, it's sometimes they don't do as they're supposed to and remove signs or cover signs in a timely manner. So we get calls and whatnot, and so we end up, calling them back and saying, get out there and get it covered or whatnot. With traffic control, they have to furnish the flagging of pilot cars. It's all incidental, of course, as is with most seal codes. And then come back in the next spring before May 15th, and we will inspect the roadways. If there's areas of concern, we'll contact the contractor and have them come out with us. We generally don't have them come out if we don't see anything. And then they'll have to repair that stuff prior to September 1st of that same season, and it'll be at their cost. I've only had a couple times where I've had to meet with contractors out there, and we've had some where the road was really rough. I'll have some pictures of it here in a bit, and he couldn't figure out what it was, and we couldn't figure out what it was. One thing was noticed was that there was kind of a wave going out in front of the rollers as they were doing their rolling, and it was weird. We still can't figure out exactly what it was. Our first projects, this was back in 2017. We had this was the initial test project of it. It was up on Highway 5 in the Bottineau area, Highway 14. Over here, Bottineau is right center of the screen. I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but and then Highway 83 north of Westo. Here's the project information. Total miles was 45 miles of it, 30 on Highway 5, 9 on 14, and 6 miles on Highway 83. Traffic data was anywhere range between 100 ADT and about 1,800. So we had a kind of a wide variety of traffic volumes. Project was bid in February. Our estimate was at 1.2 million. Low bid was Morris Seal Coat and Trucking at 1.2. Second bidder was Tumas Paving at not much higher, and then Aztec was at about 1.6. So there was not a lot of variance really at that point. Now what we're seeing is most of our seal coats are kind of going bidding a little higher than what we've normally been seeing. So except for this last bid opening. But still, I believe all of the bids are coming in relatively similar. You get into construction with the testing. When the contractor lets us know that their stockpiles are ready, we'll go in, we'll take the 3 samples, average them, and let them know if they've passed. And if so, we'll let them go ahead. One thing we would like to change, or what we've looked at changing, was going to 5 samples to get a little more of a little more information, a better sampling of the piles, and then average all those. Test strips, like on this project, we had 3 locations since it was 3 different highways and 1,000 foot on each. We went out and we did 2 of them one day, fairly close to each other at the junction of 5 and 14, and then another day we went out and took a look at the one on 83. Can't use water on the test strips, and then once those were done and looked good, we let them proceed. Here's a couple pictures of the test strips. You can see that they have good coverage there. There's no bleeding. Roadways look good. And here's the third one. Again, they got good coverage. The roadway looks nice. It's a close-up of what the surface looks like. So you can see they've got good proper embedment there. You know, some districts don't utilize fog seal on top of their chip seals. We like to, because we have seen a lot better seating of the chip. So I guess we would recommend using a fog seal on the chips. With construction or materials, of course, CRS2P, we shot that between 0.38 and 0.43 gallons per square yard. We average around that 4.0, which is pretty standard for a chip seal project. The cover coat class 41M, we're between 20 and 25, which is pretty standard for designing as well. And we averaged about 23 pounds per square yard there. The fog oil was a CSS1H, and we shot that at a rate of 5 gallons per square yard. The oil acceptance was, of course, based on certification and performance. One of the things with the oils that we found when you collect, the reason we're doing the acceptance based off certification is because when you get your oil samples and you send them off to get tested, it's a 30-day window really to get those tested in. Well, a lot of times you're not getting that test until pretty close to that 30-day window is up. And if you do have a problem and you have to go have the ones on either side tested, it's going to be outside of that window. So there's a good chance that they could fail. So it's more of a, we'll accept it on certification. You're going to probably see if there's a problem with it out in the field when they're shooting it, whether it's not spraying right, it just doesn't look right on the road, the material is moving around too much, things like that. You'll probably notice it on the road. So that's kind of why we went to acceptance on certification. Secondary review, as I said before, it's going to be conducted in May, generally before May 15th. We'll usually, like I said, take a look at it first. If the contractor needs to come out, we'll have them come out and check on or look at any of the sites that we have in question, and then they'll have to repair those. We've had, like I said, 2 where they've come out and they couldn't really pinpoint what the problem could have been either. So for what they did to fix it is, one of them, they went and microsurfaced over it, which worked very well. It was on Highway 52, and that was a very high volume roadway. And the other one was on Highway 28 near Carpio, it's a lower volume roadway, but there they just put another chip seal over top of it. And those all worked very well. Payment for materials on here, the chip seal was paid for by the square yard, and that includes the chip, the CRS2P, and the fog oil. The rest of the items are paid by, normal units. Here's some of the equipment you'll see on a chip seal. You've got your distributor, your rollers and your trucks, your chip spreader, and then your broom. In construction, things that we want people to watch for are streaking, the joints, the amount of float that's out there, the dust, the oversized and deleterious material, rough areas and rolling speeds, and I've got pictures of most of these. So here you're seeing some streaking on the shoulder when they are fogging it. We actually have the contractor come back and fix that because we want to get a nice uniform coverage. The joints, as you can see here is where the joint is. The contractor needs to make sure they are using their building material or metal sheets so that you don't get a bump in that location. Float, there's a little bit too much float here. There's a lot too much float here. It was broomed off. This is an intersection. The contractor was required to come back and remove all that material once the project was finished. Here's kind of what you would see as acceptable float. That there's not a lot of float out there, so that's nice to see. And the contractor doesn't want to use too much material out there because it for one, it dislodges other chips if you've got too much class 41 out there. See on this other picture on the right side where there's the truck that's going through there, there's a lot of dust behind it. We had the contractor flush the pile again because that we were seeing so much dust. The tests reports showed that they were right on the edge of the 1.5%, and so we had them flush it again. Here you'll see oversized. There's about a dozen or so 1-inch rocks in here. Here the contractor was probably getting in a little too deep into their stockpile site. And then on the next one is clay chunks that are in there. Again, getting a little bit too far into the base of the stockpile. One picture I could not find, and I really wanted it for this presentation, was of what would be considered some major deleterious material. Contractor was, and it's also kind of the form of the Not My Job award. Contractor was shooting the oil on a project on one of our jobs, and there was a roadkill moose on the side of the road. Well, they sprayed right over top of it and kept going. And of course, traffic drives by and they get a picture of it and they send it out, and you find it on social media. Not a great thing to see. That employee, I believe, for the contractor was let go because he did that, and so it's not a great thing to see. It's something that is obviously very frowned upon. Yeah, I know we've seen pictures of where stripers will stripe over a dead animal on the line, but this was a little more than that. Rough areas, as you can see here, this is one of the areas we had the contractor come and redo because it rode very rough. Not sure exactly why we were getting this almost old school camel pattern to it. But we did see that, and the contractor was asked to come back, and they had no problem fixing this. Roller speeds, as mentioned before, less than 7 miles per hour. The deliverables from the contractor basically want them they're giving us a log basically showing their daily and running totals of aggregate chip seal oil, or the seal coat oil, and the fog seal oil. So things I guess, well, how have they turned out? Great. We've had nothing but great success with it. We've found good chip embedment, good oil coverage, little no bleeding. To date, we've done 476 miles, and with that only had 2.5 lane miles that had to be repaired. So that's about 0.5% of repair. This year we've got 125 miles scheduled. So it's been a good project for it, or way to do this project for us. Here's some stuff from back in the 2017 project where the September, we looked at the roadway. This is the test area, the test strip. So from, what is that, 4 months with some plowing going on, it looks pretty good. We don't see any chip loss there, and the roadway's looking nice. Here's another stretch, same type of deal. Things are looking really good. So some of the risk concerns we have with doing a warranty chip seal is the contractors have the more risk on a project like this. They don't have the control of the winter maintenance that the roadway will see. We do not tell the plow operators where the test strips are, because we don't want them doing anything different. The department risk is basically additional time and labor it costs to us to go review the spring or in the spring and quantify any of the failures, which really is not a risk. But it's just, there's a little extra time there. If the chip seals are put down late season, there's a little more chance of failing, but if you get them done in the June, July, August, well, June and July anyway, early August, you get good traffic on it. They set up really well. So some of the concerns we've had is drilling, which is basically kind of like that shoulder picture I had earlier, where they're just the stivvies are plugged or something to that effect, where you're just getting rows of oil and chip. But that could happen either way, and the contractor would be required to come back and fix those areas. Another concern, like I said before, is traffic control not being maintained and not being removed timely. Snowplow damage, we'd seen a little bit of that, usually at your crown. Sometimes you may have a quarter crown in your road. And if it's at the quarter crown, you see the snowplow damage. As long as we're seeing similar to what was going on in the test strip, we're not penalizing the contractor or making them come back to fix those little things. Some adjustments we made from the first one on out to now is we're requiring additional material to be stockpiled at locations prior to beginning test strips. And then we're looking at maybe we started looking at maybe half the planned quantity in each segment. We're taking additional samples of the stockpiles, 5 per stockpile, and then averaging those. The shot rate, we're tightening up that from a 0.4 to 0.43 instead of the 0.38. So moved up that bottom end. The contractor, we're having them keep a log of the length of the project they completed each day, so we can, calculate shot rates and application rates. One we also found was do not use CR2P on the shoulders and approaches without a cover coat. That gets to be kind of a sticky situation. Had that happen going through one of our small towns, and we had a lot of calls on material sticking to vehicles and such. So what did others think? The districts that have done it in the past and kind of followed suit, they seem to like it. At least that's what I've been hearing. And the contractors seem to like it. They like not having somebody standing over their shoulder, but they're able just to get things done, and it's worked well for them. So takeaways, like I said, it's worked well. Got a little bit of a cost savings to the department. I didn't go into some of that. What we were finding, averaging about 3,000 per lane mile or per mile for a consultant to oversee it. If we had Transtex doing it, we were running around that $800 to $900 per mile, and with this, we were seeing about maybe 300 per mile is what our costs were. So you see also as a minimal risk means to manage a chip seal, and it's another tool for a toolbox. So open it up to questions.
Chad, Jesse, Grand Forks here.
Yes, sir.
As far as your car's documentation for inspection and project diaries, how do you handle that with the warranty chip seals?
We put in there basically the information from the initial day that we are working, and then we will follow it up. Usually, I mean, daily we're checking in with the contractor to see where they're at, what they're doing. They're sending their information to us, so we're adding that information to cars on a daily basis. So we are entering info daily.
Do you have someone going out there daily just to do a check on them?
No, we don't. It's one of those things where somebody from the district will happen to be driving through that area, and if they see anything, they will of course make a phone call. But so like the pictures I had there of the dust and the deleterious material, that was just a trip I decided to make out there and check on it, just for the heck of it, and notice those things. So then, we start contacting the contractor and have them make the fixes. So usually someone's in that area anyway, but they're not sitting there 24, all 13, 14, 15 hours a day with the contractor.
Okay, thanks, Chad.
Yep. Dustin, I saw you popped in.
Yeah, and Jesse beat me to it by a half second there. Kind of similar question. I was relating to the updating the work zone traffic control on cars. I was basically gonna ask, did you have someone checking on that work zone every day, or because I'm assuming, I guess basically was how the information was being conveyed, if we had a guy going out there every day, or if we're taking reports from the prime super or something like that. So
Yeah.
kind of along the same line as Jesse's question.
Sure. Yeah, it's a daily phone call to the contractor is really what it's we talk to them in the morning, we talk to them in the afternoon. They'll be emailing us the documentation and whatnot for where they've been, what they've done, their shot reports, all that information is usually coming in the next day or so. Sometimes it's taking a little while for the contractor to get us the reports and whatnot. But for the most part, things have been working well with it.
I had one question. You showed that one picture where they had the rough area. I think you called it like a camel pattern or whatever.
Yeah. Yep.
And I was curious how they fixed that, if they had to grind that off there or scrape the chip seal off there before they re-chipped over it, or if you were able to just chip over the top of it, or how you fix that area.
They actually offered to do a microseal over it, or microsurface over it.
Well, that helps.
Yeah.
And just kind of a follow-up to some of the last two questions in Dickinson, we've been using it for a couple years now, and we do it a little bit different. We do try to have one person out there for the majority of the day, just to make sure traffic control is staying the way we want it and stuff like that, but definitely cuts down on having to have somebody out there taking samples and shot rates and all that stuff. So I don't think there's anything that prohibits a district from having a representative out there if you're more comfortable with that or whatever. But
no, it's not. And I guess we put a little more trust in the contractor and their in what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think they'd like that. They'd like to know that we can trust them.
Yep.
For what it's worth, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't know the answer to this, Chad, but I guess other districts can chime in. So Grand Forks is going to do their first warranty chip seal this year. Are we the last district to try it, or is there other ones that have not done it yet?
No, I think Fargo hasn't done it yet. I think all the rest of them have tried it or are trying it.
We haven't done it in Devil's Lake yet.
Oh, you haven't? Okay.
Yeah, that's right, Chad here, but we are doing our first one as well.
Okay.
So
And we
Chad,
worked with 3 contractors so far. We've worked with Northern, we worked with Morris Seal Coat and Aztec. Morris has been great, Aztec has been pretty darn good, and Northern has had some challenges.
Chad, Ed here in Grand Forks.
Yes, sir.
Since this is warranty work now, have you considered changing the completion date, or have you changed the completion date?
We did not change the completion date, and I guess we hadn't looked at that. We wanted to stick with the September 1st date just because we do see we get benefit from getting them, you know, in the normal time of the year where we can get traffic on it and help embed that chip.
If they requested to extend it, would you? Since they're providing the warranty?
I guess I really hadn't thought about that. Might be something to entertain.
I think the hard part about that is you're comparing it to your test section. You're comparing the rest of the job to your test section. So if all of your test section and if everything was done after that date, you know, you might have to work out some different acceptance criteria or whatever.
Right. They could probably come in and put their test section down in June and then come back and do the rest of it in September, and it really wouldn't be comparing apples and apples.
I think that's the thing to keep in mind is you're comparing the entire job to that test section. So if you lose the chips on the test section and the rest of the job, it wouldn't be their fault. Is that the way you would read that?
Yes.
I have added the SP to some plans that we put together this last winter. I guess I didn't look at the language super closely, but is there a time frame between approving the test strip and basically that you've got to conduct the work? I mean, could Jason's situation actually happen where they do a test strip early in the summer, but then not actually perform work until late in the summer?
There probably could be. I guess I hadn't looked that closely. We hadn't run into that because we do let them do the test strip and then continue on most of the time. We don't have them do the fog coat over top of it. We look at because the fog coat's going to be a completely separate operation. As long as our chip seal itself looks good, we usually let them continue. And I don't think they're going to mold a lot in and not continue.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was thinking too, is like, well, they probably wouldn't want to do a test strip and then decide not to do at least something right after that, because like you say, why would they want to mob all that stuff just to do that 1,000 feet?
One other question, Chad, are you seeing counties utilize this in Minot district, or are other districts seeing the counties utilizing this warranty?
Not yet. However, I'm getting a lot of questions from Ward County and Montreal County about it because I think they're looking at going to it.
Hey,
You're
this
the
is
lab.
Bernie in the Bismarck district.
Yes, sir.
Eric Merck, you guys look in the chat there. He said that he believes this special provision states to conduct a test strip on the first day of chip sealing. And I think that's probably in there.
And I think you're correct.
Excellent,
so-
thank you.
Just wondering if you had a example, like an email or something from the contractor of everything he's telling you every day, or is it just, I guess if you could provide that, it'd be helpful, you know, RPs and traffic switches and whatever, but if it's just a phone conversation, I understand.
Yeah, most of it's phone conversation in the morning to find out where they're at, what they got done the previous day, you know, where they ended up, where they're starting, obviously. And then kind of too, if they're going to another roadway in that, say you've got 3 roadways you're working on, if they're going to the next one, they haven't done a test strip, we're gonna have somebody run out there and do that test strip. And then we just coordinate with them on when they figure they're gonna be there that time of day. That doesn't always happen correctly because there are breakdowns. So we may get out there and we have to wait a couple hours before they get to it. So at that point in time, we may run through and, you know, look at the rest of the project, look at the signing. You know, it's not a complete, here you go, you did your test strip, we're out of here. We're still involved. We're just not there every waking moment of the chip seal.
Chad, Dustin again in Grand Forks. Just curious as to what changes, if there's been any, have you noticed from as far as what the DOT does or participates in from the very first time you did one of these to now? Have you been getting increasingly more hands off, or did you start out at a level that worked right away and then you just maintain that throughout the years? Or just kind of get just curious, you know, how much time it kind of took to kind of let go, I guess.
I think we let go fairly quickly. That first year we were there a little more often. The second year was a lot less. And in the third year, it really depended on the contractor we had. We've done a lot of work with Morris. We've done a lot of work with Aztec, so we knew the crews. We had a lot more confidence in them. When Northern came in, we weren't as confident, and they kind of proved it to us. With, like I said, the rocks and the clay and the dust and whatnot that we had seen. You know, so it took a little more there. We were a little more hands-on that one. But when it was Morris and Aztec, we didn't really see any problem with it. So it'll vary on who your contractor is, I think, and how comfortable you are with that group.
Chad, this is Heather out of Dickinson. I just wanted to ask, how did you guys verify the less than 2% of bleeding the flesh off the test strip and the cover aggregate on it? It calls for that 2% in the SP, so I was just curious on how you guys checked it versus what we did on some of ours.
I guess we look at it as just a visual. If we see any, we would, you know, you're 1,000 square feet or 1,000 foot by 12 foot. If you see some, you can measure it up and then calculate it out that way, but we really didn't see a lot of it, so we haven't had to mess with that.
So the same with the 70% embedment, just a visual.
Yeah, it's a visual.
Hey, Chad, I just had one quick question. So the specs say to have the completion date for like a normal chip seal is like September 1st, right? But we don't have a completion date in the SP, is that right? Or am I misunderstanding?
No, I'm pretty sure we got a complete. Well, our completion date will be in the proposal.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep. Well, I've run past my time. I think we'll be turning it over to the next one. Unless, if you have any other questions, you can sure email me or give me a call.
Thanks, Chad. I think a lot of us are excited to try this out for ourselves. So I'm glad you were willing to lead the way on it.
Oh, yeah. No, we actually like this one. So like I said, any questions, just give me a call. Thank you.
Do you have anything else, Chad, from your district, or is Fargo going next?
Eric and I will do the next one here for concrete paving inspection.
Okay, sounds good, thanks.
Yep, I'm just trying to find the present button here, or share.
What part of the district did you take that picture in, Patrick?
That one I just stole.
I was going to ask the same thing.
I'm just kidding.
So, somewhere in North Dakota. Yeah, so I'll start off here where Eric and I are doing a concrete paving inspection. My name's Patrick. I'm out of the Fargo district. Let me just make sure this works. I can't seem to advance the slides.
They fighting you?
Yeah. Oh,
Down
it's
there.
over here. Let's see if this works. There we go. We'll start off with mix design. That's going to be prior to your paving. There's 3 steps to getting your mix design approved before paving. That'd be the submittals, the verifications, and the approvals. First, your submittals, the contractor has to submit all data 14 days prior to paving. That's the complete mix design, all the test data, and your samples. The sample size is in the 550 specifications, and then you'll also get like your mix proportions, your gradations, your trial batches, and your strength maturity curve if that's something you're utilizing. For verification, we'll go over the gradation, run a trial batch, and develop our own maturity as well. And some of these examples here, so you have your sieve analysis, your trial batches. They'll check the yield and the slump and stuff in the air, and then also some of your compressive and flexural strengths, and make sure that those are meeting our specifications. And if that all checks out, materials and research will send out a report back, and if everything looks good, your design gets approved, and the contractor is good to proceed with that design. I'll talk a little bit about the maturity curve development and the verification process. It follows the ASTM C1074. It's created a lot of times prior and during the development of the mix design. So typically what I've seen is we'll get a mix design submitted with some starting dates for the maturity. So we'll usually get like the 1, 3, and 7 day maturity. And then we'll be waiting on those 14 and 28 day maturity strengths as the mix design is being reviewed and approved. And once you get a maturity curve, when you're out in the field, you'll verify that using cylinders or beams and some of our maturity data logging sensors. And to verify the maturity curve, you'll have to be within 50 PSI of the flexural strength. So that'd be your beams, or within 300 PSI of the compression strength, which would be your cylinders. And in the Fargo district, we've been using SmartRock devices and applications. In the upper right, that's a screen grab from our iPads using the SmartRock application. It tracks the temperatures every 15 minutes and it'll log that temperature. You can also plug in your maturity curve information, and that'll convert your running temperatures into maturity, which is degrees over hours. So, and then the bottom right is the actual device. It's a Bluetooth puck with a temperature sensor that goes into whatever slab that you're pouring. They are designed to be kind of one-use things, but we've been able to recycle them. You cut the temperature probe off and splice on a new one, and you're able to use those same pucks for about 60 days. So there are some pros and cons with using the maturity curve. The pros are it's instant and repeatable readings. So you drive out to wherever your sensor is, you pull out your iPad or your phone, download the data through Bluetooth, and it'll give you a strength right there on your phone. You can do that at any time, day or night. So if you're waiting for those breaks, you can scan it as many times as you want. You're no longer waiting on cylinder breaks from your lab. It's also a time and money saver. Making a lot of cylinders or beams and then running them into the lab every day can take up a lot of time, both making those and the transportation time, and then your lab guy breaking them. There are a few cons to using the maturity curve. They are derived values, since they are just based off of the temperature and that maturity curve. If you have variances in any of your mix, that won't be reflected in your results because it's just giving you a temperature. And there is a cost barrier to entry with these. Each one of our pucks that we've used, these Smart Rocks, I believe are around $100 a piece. You can use them for about 60 days, and then you need new ones. For cylinder breaks within like 3 days, you probably want to have at least 4 or 5 on hand, just in case. So you have those available for when you're pouring and your other ones are in use. There are some other devices available that we haven't explored, but Smart Rock isn't the only one that's capable of doing this. And then I'll hand it off here to Eric for some stockpile management and some other topics.
All right, thanks, Pat. For those of you that don't know, my name's Eric Merck. I am the construction team lead up in the Minot district. Like Pat said, we're going to be talking about concrete paving inspection today and kind of more geared toward some long mainline paving versus the hand placed stuff. So with that, I guess we'll get into stockpile management. So stockpile management as it pertains to batch plants, some good practices you want to see at the site, or make sure your stockpiles are placed on some sort of a pad, whether that be a different type of aggregate or hard surface. You want to see those stockpiles placed on a good pad. We also want to make sure that those stockpiles are separated. This picture on the right would be more what you would see at a gravel pit. At a batch plant site, you'll see big stockpiles. Basically, you want them far enough to where you can maybe drive a pickup between them. Another thing with the stockpiles, we want to make sure that they're placed relatively close to the feeder bins at the plant. The reason for that is we don't want the loader operator driving a quarter mile to go get 3/8 inch rock for their mix. So we want to make sure that everything's kind of situated close to the plant and in a way that's easy for the contractor to access. Went a little too far. Another good practice with the stockpiles is we want to see how the material is being taken from the stockpiles by the loader. We don't want the loader digging into a dry part of the pile, or I guess we want them digging from the bottom to the top. We also don't want them digging into the pad that they made. This picture in the top right would be the sand pile that they used on a paving job last year. These little depressions are how they actually sampled for their testing and what we sent to Bismarck for our test design. So we want to make sure we sample from different areas of the stockpile. And how they sampled this is it basically looked like a big cake pan on a forklift, and they shoved it into the middle of the pile. So you want to make sure you're getting material from the core of the pile so you can get accurate moisture readings. You don't want to just take samples from the outside crust of the pile. Another good practice at the batch plant, the QC plan for the batch plant, do they have a plan for managing the moisture of those stockpiles? Stockpiles we've had in the past on paving jobs have been kind of in windy locations throughout the state. So the contractor has had to make sure to water down those stockpiles multiple times throughout the day of paving so that their mix doesn't get too dry out on the roadway. One spec to note about the stockpiles is that the contractor is required to produce a minimum of 25% of the remaining material to produce the concrete left on the job. So before you let the contractor start, you want to make sure they have some pretty good sized piles at the batch plant site. Moving on to batch plant QC and what you want to see from the contractor. Good components of a good plan. We want to make sure that the batch plant is certified before they start. The certifications for the batch plant can come before the plant is set up. Usually they'll get one cert for the year. After they set the plant up, you want to make sure that the scales are certified. You'll get a submittal from the contractor for that. And we also want to see the site plan for the batch plant. Like I said earlier, you want to see how they're going to set their stockpiles up in relation to their feeder bins and how the site's going to operate, where trucks are going to be coming into the site and where loader trucks are going to be leaving. You want to make sure you have a good, easy way for those trucks to get in and out of the site and not interfere with how material is being put into the plant. Another thing you want to see in the contractor's QC plan is an organizational chart of the plant personnel. This will include basically the plant operator all the way down to the certified testers. You'll have testers for aggregate and you'll have certified testers for the cement. Typically there'll be different people because they'll be running these tests at the same time. You want to see in their plan that they plan on testing material multiple times a day. That way they can keep track of their moisture in the stockpiles and they can adjust the water going into the mix to make sure they have the correct mix design before it goes to the roadway. Also during production, you want to see in their QC plan how they're going to account for hauling to different locations on the project site. Obviously for longer haul distances, they're going to have to account for maybe they got to change their aggregate blends or add some more water or cementitious to make sure they keep their workability for that longer haul time to get to where the paver's at. As they get closer to the plant, they may adjust their mix, minor adjustments, because they may not need as much cementitious to keep that workability in that mix. As far as tickets that you're going to get from the batch plant, all the things listed here on the left side is what is required in the spec. I included an example ticket that we had from a job last year. You want to see the ticket number. You want to see the project and PCN number, the delivery date of the concrete, the contractor name. A big thing is the time of the weighing, because that's what you look at on a ticket to see your 30 or 60-minute time to the roadway, whether you have to reject that truck or not. You also want to see a truck ID number, and then also a quantity of all the materials they're using in the mix. With that, I'll pass it back to Pat, and he's going to talk about what you expect to see in the pre-pave meeting.
So during your pre-pave meeting, it's the purpose of is it's a coordination meeting between the DOT, the prime contractor, and the paving contractor if they're separate contractors, and you just want to set expectations for the DOT and the contractor so everybody's on the same page. Generally, what you want to go over is some lines of communication. So you want to get a hold of who's going to be the paving foreman, who's the plant foreman, who's the prime contractor, who do you call when things are not going right. You want to go over specs, any relevant SPs, go over your field testing and sampling manual. Make sure you got those frequencies of testing figured out. Figure out where's a good spot to test, and then any relevant plan notes as well. And then you'll just generally go over any questions or concerns either the contractor has or you as the DOT has regarding any paving on the project. So some of those are safety questions, like how when you're going into sample aggregate in the batch plant, who do you call, who's going to coordinate that? Safety at the paver. You'll want to go over that type of information, and then you'll also want to take note of what that paving operation is going to look like. There's different types of mainline paving that we see. Up top is a stringless paver that utilizes a haul road and a side placer with baskets installed ahead of time. The second one there is a stringline paver with overhead placer that runs trucks on grade, baskets installed at the point of placement. You got lane paving second from the bottom, that uses a mobile placer with continuously reinforced pavement. And then your bottom one is a stringless paver with no placer, trucks right on the grade, baskets installed at the point of placement. So all of these are a little different. They'll have different things to watch out for. So it's a good idea to have an understanding of what the contractor expects for their paving train and to coordinate any kind of differences in these different operations. They each have their own niche uses, different ways of inspecting that go along with those too. And I'll pop it back over to Eric here.
All right, thanks, Pat. Now we're going to get kind of into the meat of the presentation, what we should be looking at during paving, and what inspection things we need to look at. Inspection before placement. When I say before placement, I mean out in front of the placer machine, pretty much in front of where the trucks are dumping the concrete. We're mainly going to go through string line paving here. One thing to look for, make sure the string line is in good condition. Make sure it's attached to all of the hangers. You want it to be tight. You don't want it to be sagging anywhere. Make sure nobody's hitting it or bumping it. Another thing to do to check before the trucks dump, which hopefully with this e-ticketing coming, we won't have to dodge concrete trucks anymore, but things to look at on the ticket. One of the most important things on the top right of the ticket usually will be the time the truck left the plant. Haul time for non-agitating trucks, you have 30 minutes before they have to dump it, and then it's 60 minutes for agitating equipment. Another thing to look at on these tickets, they will include a target and an actual weight of each material that is dumped. The target is based on the mix design that the contractor submits at the start, and the actual is what when the bins actually shut off, that's the weight of the material that comes through. Your allowable tolerances for that, for your bulk cement and fly ash, is plus or minus the 1% of the mix design. Aggregate components is plus or minus 2%. Water is plus or minus 1%. And admixtures are plus or minus 5% of the material volume, or 1 fluid ounce, whichever is greater. So those are the main things that you want to look at on your tickets as you get them. Also, before the concrete is dumped, you want to check what the base surface is. Here, this is a picture of a job from the Williston district last year. They're doing a very good job of watering the surface. Also, you notice there's no loose materials on the roadway. It was swept and got rid of all the, what I call the junk, before the concrete came. Another thing to check if you're placing on a milled asphalt surface is look for any delaminations of the milled asphalt. If it's starting to crack or pop out due to the trucks backing up back and forth on it, you want to make sure that material is removed. If it does get all the way down to the base, make sure that the base gravel is packed before the concrete is placed. Another thing you can check out in front of where the concrete is placed is you'll notice along the side of the roads, the contractor will stage out their dowel bars and their dowel baskets. You can be checking those and make sure the baskets are straight, make sure the dowel bars are sitting properly in the baskets. You don't want them to be loose or out of one of the hangers. Also, you can check the epoxy coating of the bars. We're not allowed to have more than, I believe it's 2% damage to the epoxy coating over 1 foot. It's pretty visible to see if the bars are damaged beyond repair. If you can see dowel bar baskets that are damaged out in front, you can tell the contractor, hey, replace these, get them out of the way. That way they're not having to rush right in front of the placer machine. At the
Hey, Eric, this
Yes.
is Bernie.
Yep.
On that last slide, what do they do with that water that's over there on the edge?
So that was
Funneled
an issue. I'm sure Williston's getting nightmare flashbacks to this. So basically, the designers made them mill in a bathtub, is what they were calling it.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, it was kind of warm enough when they were paving this to, by the time it got to the paver, most of it was evaporated. There was a little bit left, but not enough for a lot of concern.
So I suppose you could just have a brushy broom or a broom out there.
Yep, I believe
kinda...
they were brooming it too.
As long as they had a clean broom that's been cleaned, they should just be able to spread that out if they get there and it's too
Right.
close.
Yep, I know in,
Okay.
in some of the site curves, they're actually having to mill that shoulder out to get the water
Oh,
out, so,
sure. Okay, thank you.
yep, no problem. Moving on, right at concrete placement, one thing we want to check, we want to make sure that the dowel bars baskets and the center line baskets are secured. One way we were checking them was basically we had an inspector just tap them with a foot, make sure that they were in place. We want to make sure those baskets are straight. These two gentlemen here, they would take a string line and basically run it across the road and make pavement marks to make sure everything was straight. We also want to make sure and check that those dowel bars are at the proper spacing. Obviously, you'll have details on where your sockets are going to be. Typically, they're on mainline paving, they're 15-foot longitudinally. Like I said, again, make sure that dowel bars are sitting correctly in the baskets once they're nailed down, and then check if the epoxy coating is damaged. Other considerations, make sure that the base is still wet. Here you can see it's drying out a little bit. Wouldn't be too awful concerned about that. You can see most of the road is wet there. And then also another thing to check is you can see there's 3 loads of concrete here, and just visually inspecting it, you can see that they have the same consistency. If you start seeing concrete loads show up to where they start looking soupy or they look way too dry, start looking at your tickets. You could even call the batch plant operator and say, hey, what's going on here? What changed? Check your stockpiles, talk to the paving superintendent and see what's going on there. As far as inspection directly at the paver, the paving machine itself, you can visually inspect it, see if there's any visible oil or hydraulic leaks. Does the paver sound funny? If it sounds anything different than a loud hum, if you hear loud clunking noises or something like that, or it's shaking more than you would expect, speak up, tell the paving super, hey, what's going on? Check your paver. Also, there's vibrators underneath. You can see if they're working. If they're not, you can see vibrator trails basically behind where the finishers are working. Guy standing here playing on his phone, obviously everything must be going good, but this screen here, he can actually see the frequency on all his vibrators and see if they're all working correctly or not. Another thing to look at the paver, as far as the head of the concrete in front here, we have the placer machine. You can see that there's a pretty high head on the placer machine, which is usual, but it's doing its job. If you look back at the head on the paver, it's very low. That's what we want to see. We don't want to see the concrete head get up to the top of this yellow line here. If the head gets too high, it can actually put so much weight and force on the front of that paver that it will actually float the paver. Something we don't want. You'll start seeing it on the RRI, and the paver will start operating funny. Another thing we're doing at the paver, we're doing all of our material testing. As far as the sampling locations, I believe our specifications only say check sample the concrete at placement. That could mean out in front of the placer machine, between the placer machine or the paver, or behind the paver. Generally, we're taking it out where they're dumping the concrete, as long as the distance between that and where they're actually hitting it with the paver is relatively short. A good practice of that would be when they start, take a sample in front of the placer, and then you can sample it behind the paver. The contractor's not going to like it. Let them know beforehand that you're going to do it. We are allowed to do it. The reasoning for that is you can check your air loss in that concrete. If it's relatively high, then there's something you need to be looking at there. And you can tell, like if they're riding, I believe air is 5 to 8%. If they're 5.2% in front of the placer machine, if they got a 0.5% air loss by the time they get to the paver, there's need to be some adjustments at the plant for that. The frequency that we're sampling, we're taking the slump every 2,000 square yards, air content and unit weight every 2,000 square yards, and cylinders, casting cylinders 1 per 250 cubic yards, unless we are using the maturity curve that Patrick was talking about earlier. We used the maturity curve on our job last year. I really liked it. Takes a lot less work to go look at those sensors than the haul 30 to 50 cylinders around every day back to the breaker. As far as tie bars, Patrick's got a good photo here of tie bars. Looks like there's on-ramp paving here and mainline paving. Make sure you're checking your grade and your size to determine the paving. Obviously, different size bar here is going to have different spacing. Is also your spacing changes with the depth of your concrete. One thing to note, make sure that we're keeping our tie bars 15 inches away from any transverse joints. Inspection behind the paver, things to look for. You can see here, they've got their burlap right behind the screed. Make sure that that's staying wet, but don't let them over wet it. Sometimes they'll get a little carried away there. If the mix is dry, I'd rather see them make adjustments at the plant versus dousing it with water behind the paver. They're also not allowed to, most people call it blessing, is where they take their water brushes and they start throwing water back where these finishers are. Do not let them do that. We're also looking behind the paver at the surface finish. Includes these guys that are running the bowl floats, our carpet drag, what our tying depths are, and then also what the curing compound looks like. As far as the surface finish where they are running their bowl floats, top right photo here is a picture of what you want to see. You want to see the side of the mat closed up. You don't want to see any bug holes, as well as the top. You notice that right behind the burlap, even before he's bowl floating, it is very nice and smooth. That means you have a good mix, you have good workability, and things are running really smoothly. Photos at the center top here is kind of what you don't want to see. There's a lot of bug holes here. These guys are going to have to do a lot of work to try to finish this before the cure cart comes. If you start seeing this, start asking questions on why is your mix dry. Is there something we need to do at the plant to remedy this? And then on the bottom right here is a good example of a vibrator potentially not working. You can see smooth on both sides, and there's almost a streaking down the middle. I mean, to me, it looks like there's some kind of consolidation issue here. We're not getting the concrete vibrated properly, and we may be having issues. If you start seeing that, start talking to the guy on the paver. As far as behind the finishers and behind the paver, for our surface finish on all jobs, we'll have a carpet drag. For roadways with speeds greater than 45, we'll have metal tining. That's kind of this metal tine is what you see here. We want to make sure that those tines are spaced evenly across from each other. We want to make sure they're straight. We don't want to see a bunch of wiggles in our tining. Could create problems with our ride. Also, the contractor will be imprinting the concrete with start and end stations each day with the dates that they're starting. One thing to look at when they're imprinting, make sure they're not pushing those stamps into the mat too far. We had one guy that was putting stamps in and he was pushing them, seemed like 2 inches into the mat, and they were almost not readable because he was getting a little carried away there. As far as the curing compound, we want full coverage of our curing compound. This is a good picture here, good full coverage. We also want to see curing compound on the vertical face of the slip forming as well. There should be a nozzle out to the side of this cure cart, making sure that we're getting full coverage on that. And then the cure does need to be applied within 30 minutes of our final screeding from the paver. Some red flags to look for while you're out there inspecting. One of the most common things you'll see is dowel basket pop-outs. Reasons for this would be maybe they're not using enough nails to nail down the dowel baskets. They're probably not using long enough T-nails to secure those down. And then what happens is when the paver comes over, it's putting so much pressure on those baskets to where you can see it's twisting these wires and causing them to break apart and come out of the mat. Repairs for these, basically they'll hook a chain on it with the skid steer and try to yank the old one out. And then you can see these two guys are standing on a new dowel bar basket with vibrators, and they're trying to vibrate it down to the sub base in time before that 30-minute window. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. One thing to check with that is to use your MIT scan the next day and see where that basket actually ended up and how deep it is. Some more red flags while you're out there inspecting. One thing to note that's a pretty good indicator of how your mix is doing is your finishers. Are they stretched out way behind the paver, or is there a couple of them that are barely working, 2 of them that are playing on their phones? If they start getting stretched way back to the carpet drag, you need to start asking questions. If it gets to be too bad, you should probably start thinking about rejecting trucks until they catch up. This was one of our jobs in the Minot district a couple years ago where we were seeing this. The picture on the top right was actually after they grounded a 1/4 inch off the top of the road because they were telling us they were just bug holes at the top of the road. Obviously, they were deeper than that. One way that we kind of investigated is we started drilling core holes. We had an 8.5 inch mat, and as you can see here, these honeycombs went about 2 to 3 inches down, which is not at all what we wanted to see. What we ended up doing is basically they had to remove and re-pour these panels. Even if you're not seeing honeycombing on the side, if you're seeing it or on the top of the mat, if you're seeing it on the side and vertical face like this, you also need to start doing some investigating. If it's looking like this on the side, what's to say it doesn't look like this at the center joint? And the top may be good, but the middle, we may have a consolidation issue. Some inspection the day after the paving. So usually over the nighttime, the contractor will have their sawing crew come in. We want to make sure that the joints are all sawed in a timely manner. One thing that was kind of brought up here this last winter in discussions with Federal Highway is when they're saw cutting these transverse joints, a lot of times they'll start at the center and go out to the side. Well, the guy on the saw, he may not turn around and cut the other side right away. He may wait until he's done with this whole side before he comes in and does this side. That could have the potential for this failed joint cracking, where that joint will actually start cracking, and if there's no saw cut on the other side to follow, it will not end up where we want it. Another thing to check on the saw cuts, make sure they're deep enough. Typically, we'll have 1/3 of the mat thickness will be our saw cut joint. That's kind of a critical issue. If we don't get them sawed deep enough, we may also have failed joint cracking like this as well. Another thing they'll do is when they get to the end, if the guy in the saw is twisting his saw blade, you'll get these joint blowouts. It's also something we do not want to see. If you see this, start telling the paving super that it needs to stop. Another thing, like I mentioned before, we'll have to check the dowel bars with our MIT scan. Basically, it just is like a rolling metal detector is the best I can describe it. And you can see the location of the dowel bars. We want to make sure those dowel bars are centered over these transverse joints. Some more red flags you hear the contractor say a lot, oh, those are just shrinkage cracks. Well, are they really shrinkage cracks? We don't know. This is the same job I was showing you before. There's this little shrinkage crack that's about the size or length of this gentleman's boot here. Well, we cored it to see, hey, is it really a shrinkage crack? As you can see, 8.5 inches of concrete, it goes almost 7 inches down. Reasons that they may be happening is you probably have a dry mix. The best time to go and look for these cracks, it would be right away in the morning or after it's rained. They will stand out very easily because they trap the moisture. If you just go look on it on a hot, dry day, you may not even see them. Like I said earlier, the best time to look at these is in the morning or after rain. This is after a rain event, it was the next morning, and you can really see how these cracks are standing out. If it didn't rain, will you see this little crack up here? Probably not. So that would be one of my inspection tips. After it rains, go check for cracks. Some more miscellaneous cracking you'll get full transverse with cracking like this one here. Potential reasons for that. So our job, we were on top of a milled asphalt surface, and obviously we had transverse cracks all the way across the road just from the asphalt. Those have the potential to reflect through to the surface. Another spot we found them were over the center of culverts, right down center of the culvert. Again, not much you can do about there. One thing we did try to do was remove that panel because it was in the mid panel, and then we put a new joint basically down the center of that culvert with dowel bars to hopefully prevent that from happening in the future. With that, I'm gonna pass it back off to Pat, and he's gonna go over some more things to look for.
Hey, Eric, this Bernie, Bismarck District.
Yep.
We're gonna be having a big project coming up we haven't done one of these for a long time with a bunch of concrete paving, but you know, if you're having issues with those cracks like you were showing when it was raining.
Yep.
And it continues, do you ever just have them just go out and run water on there just so you can look for them?
We have not. That was actually, so it's a 3-hour story on that project, but that was actually, we started seeing that in the first half mile to a mile right when they started paving. And then this was a couple-year process, and we're still going through the process with this contractor. This was actually the next spring. We went out there and started looking at the whole roadway because we started seeing cracks kind of outside of the area where we thought we were going to see cracks.
Yeah.
And they were popping out like crazy. So if there is rain in the forecast or early morning where there's kind of dew or frost or something, that's when it's easiest to see.
Yeah, otherwise I suppose you're almost a whole week behind before you can get a truck up there to water it anyways.
Right, and I don't know if you'll get a contract to do that or not.
Yeah. All right, just wondering. Thank you.
All right, I'll run through just a couple more accidents that happen out here on some of our paving jobs. One thing you want to look for is any rutting or pumping of the base material if there's any trucks running over it. A sound base is going to be really important to your overall pavement longevity. So if you see anything like this, you're going to want to make sure it's being addressed and fixed before you throw a bunch of concrete over it. I've tried to block out any contractor names here, but if you have a keen eye, you might be able to figure some of these guys out. But yeah, floating dowel baskets is what Eric had mentioned earlier. This is one where the basket didn't actually float. It's just one of the dowels popped out of the basket holding it. But when those vibrators go across it, this is a potential, and you'll be able to see those. Here's them trying to fix it. So they have removed the dowel basket, put a new one in, and are trying to finish the slab here by standing on top of the concrete. So that ended up coming out. That didn't work so well. You want to look out for poor saw cutting. On the left, we have a missed saw cut. So the contractor would go across with a chain and mark those joints. And then our saw guy comes through that night. Maybe it's one of the last ones of the day. He's a little tired and he comes off track a little bit. So as Eric discussed, checking those saw cuts the next day is important. On the right is a spalled saw cut. These were also not noticed until after it was ground. And what ended up being determined was the saw blade on the machine doing our saw cutting was loose and rattling, and they had 3 saws out there, and 1 saw was the culprit. So it was every 3 joints for an entire day's pave. We had spalled joints like this. Another thing you want to look out for is existing infrastructure. Beware of any overheads or existing utilities. On this project, we had 1 overhead power line, and that power line came down. If you look in the left-hand corner here, there is a sign that says there's an overhead utility. Didn't seem to do the trick though. Still got hit. And something else to look out for is damage by the traveling public. So here's a incident that occurred. We had paved our leave out, so we had a temporary diversion for our ramp traffic. Vehicle did not take that into account and drove over our new slab. So some of those issues are outside the contractor's control. But for situations like this, you want to make sure you're following your temporary traffic control plan. In this instance, we did follow our temporary traffic control plan. The temporary bypass was set up correctly with the right signs. The car drove through, it was stolen, and the driver had fled the scene. So we never found out who drove that car. And then Eric will close out here with some stringless paving information here for you. Oh, I did see a question here from Jason. The small joints from that loose saw blade, we ended up taking a deduction from the contractor, and there was 2 repairs that they did. They did one where they put a concrete, sawed it out wider and put a concrete mortar in. And then the remaining ones that were not as severe, they sawed wider and then epoxied some of those cracks back together. Not a long-term fix, obviously, so that's why we deducted some of those panels.
All right, let's get into some stringless paving. First, I got a video here, kind of show you what it's all about. I guess one thing to notice, obviously there's no string line, and you'll notice that it seems to be a lot less hectic. Have to give credit here to Brian Wallner from Communications. He was out to the Williston District last year and took a pretty good video here. So got a short little clip, show everybody kind of how it works. I guess the one thing that sticks out to me is just with the no string line, it just seems like there's a lot less junk in the way on the sides of the roads, and seems like it makes things a lot less hectic. What to look for on a stringless job? I guess the biggest thing to me is the pre-paving setup. We're putting a lot of faith in our supplemental design data, so there needs to be a lot of checks before the paver even shows up to make sure everything's good and how it's supposed to be. One thing to check, which probably you wouldn't think of, is to check the existing surface that you have. I know on our job, on one of our surfaces, the existing surface on the supplemental design data was actually 3/10 higher than what the actual ground was. So if we wouldn't have caught that, that would have been a pretty big overrun on concrete. Another thing to check on your supplemental data is your proposed surfaces and profiles and how they're tying into all of your existing features. Talking with Patrick on their Fargo job, they had trouble with their on and off ramp tie-ins. They weren't coming in very good, and I guess really no fault to the mainline paver, just the tie-ins didn't really work. On the Minot District job, we had problems with the railroad crossing, and I guess one of the cons is there's no string line out there, so it's kind of hard to foresee until the paver's 300 feet from the railroad crossing and everyone's scratching their heads doing, oh, what do we do now? Another thing in the pre-paving setup is your survey. Make sure you run your level loops, make sure that those are checked and triple checked to make sure there are no errors in that. And then also our primary and secondary control, make sure that everything is set up there. As far as equipment that they use in the stringless paving, they'll use total stations and then obviously 360 prisms. On the jobs we were working on, I believe they had a total of 6 total stations out there, and they will actually have them on both sides of the roadway. The paver and the placer machine read those total stations in front of and behind the paver. And one thing about that paver is if it loses more than 1 or 2 total stations, it'll actually shut off and float for a little bit until it picks up those total stations. As far as the crew, assigned to that equipment. There's one guy in a gator here in this top right photo, and his only job is moving total stations and prisms around throughout the whole job. So he's pretty busy. As you can tell in this bottom photo, it kind of tells you how the prisms on the paver hook up to the total stations. Basically, it's always trying to make a triangle, kind of like what you see on the supplemental surfaces. They're trying to triangulate what's going on. As far as the placer machine, it'll get the concrete to within about 1/10 using those total stations of the final grade. I don't believe it uses quite as many as the paver. Obviously, the concrete trucks dump in front of it, and then there's the auger that reduces the concrete head, moves it side to side for the actual paver. The actual paver itself, obviously, it's running off of Trimble equipment most of the time. It's got real-time communications with all of those total stations, so it's constantly adjusting, unlike a string line where you get 25 feet and you may have an angle in your concrete or something. It definitely helps with your final ride. In my experience, we've gotten really good rides off of it. There's one guy assigned permanently to looking at basically this screen at the top, and he's the guy with his head underneath the paver here. Like I said, one kind of freaky thing while you're paving is you'll hear the paver humming, then all of a sudden you'll hear like a loud go, 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 and it'll shut off for 5 or 10 seconds, and then it turns back on again. That's when it loses a total station for some reason. You'll see this guy run underneath the paver here and start hitting buttons, and pretty soon everything's running again. Another way they check to make sure that everything's running right is the guy responsible for looking at this screen also has a Trimble GPS, and he's usually walking on this rail behind the wet burlap, and he's sticking the total station on there to make sure everything's still correct. As far as pros and cons that have been my experience with the paving, the pros are obviously there's no string line. There's a lot less clutter along the roadway. Seems like it's a lot more, I guess, organized to me. You don't have 20 guys running along the ditch with multiple equipments worrying about them hitting a string line. There is a little bit of a smaller workforce, and like I said, the ride quality seems to be a little better. Cons, obviously there's no string line out in front of the paver to see tie-ins to median approaches, on ramps, off ramps, railroad crossings. So then again, that goes back to the pre-paving equipment and surfaces and making sure everything's tying in correctly. Also, another con is we're putting a lot of trust in our supplemental design data. I guess that was one of my main concerns when we started, was trusting that supplemental design data, and we did have some issues with it, but eventually we did kind of work through it and got everything squared away. So with that, I guess I'll open it up to any questions anybody may have. Dustin asked if we have a string/stringless ride comparison with the same contractor, or were they always different contractors? I don't have a comparison. The contractor we worked with is the only one that's done stringless in our district. So I don't know if Pat wants to jump in there or not.
No, I do not have any comparisons from same contractors as far as string line versus stringless.
Reason I bring it up is just, I guess there's no way to certainty to say that it was the stringless that got you a better ride. Because I've had great ride with the string too.
Yeah, I know, as far as I know, PCI still runs a string line crew and a stringless crew. And from what I've heard, their string line crew still gets a better ride. But that could just be experience too.
Yep, exactly. I guess one thing I've done a lot of these kind of jobs myself. this is Dustin again, but you're talking about like a displaced dowel bar or a basket or whatever. The examples that you were showing where it was obvious that that bar had made it up to the surface and caused either to break the surface or close enough to the surface that you were able to recognize that something was out of place. That may not always be the case. I found is that you may not have any manifested evidence of a displaced bar or basket. And so I guess one thing that we've done is if there's any questionable, you think that there might be something going on, is we'll make a note of it and then also check that with the mid-scan too.
Yeah, and I
Can't-
know
Hard to catch
we've gone so
everything, I
far as
know,
to
but
X-ray pavements as well for severe issues of basket movement.
we had one, I'm sure it was the same contractor that you were, having troubles with, but we had one where we ended up, making CPR style repairs all over on new pavement because of issues like that.
We got about 30 minutes left here. If you have any other questions, go ahead, type them into the chat or email either Eric or I if you have questions for stringless paving, but we do have one more presentation that we want to give time to, so thanks.
Okay, does everyone see that?
Riles, you want to right click on your slide and hit hide presenter view so you get full screen.
Okay, can you guys see that now? I'm Mark Riley, the materials coordinator here in Fargo District, and I got asked to talk about some of the issues we find with the project final records as we go through them. So, first of all, if you're going to work on the project final records, is review the construction records manual. The records manual is always updated, so you should review it for any changes and updates before starting the final. This will ensure that all the contract documents and submittals are in order prior to submitting the final records. Review section 4, the pay quantities for the information that needs to accompany each PQE. And the final section 7, the final records, is the most important section to review for this. The project final records and cars are done in 2 places. There's a finals tracking tab. This is where anybody can find out about the final record status with dates and comments. And construction services uses this tab regularly when they go out to check where the status of project finals are. And so if you're not keeping these up to date, then they call the districts with questions as far as project records. So if you guys keep that up to date, then they kind of know where it's at. And then the finals checklist is a list of all the important documents that may or may not be needed for your project records. And some of the documentation has information balloons to serve as a guide for information that is needed. So clicking into the finals tracking tab, this is an area that seems to be forgotten about. The top corner up here, the cars finals tracking status. There's 5 drop downs in there: a review not started, the engineer reviewing records, the district review of final records, construction services final review, and then the final voucher is sent to contractor. This is where you can find all that information. And then there's submittal dates where you check where you've delivered it to the district. The district will check where it's been sent to construction, and then there's a final voucher sent to contractor date, and then there's a box for any claim amounts right here. And then comments for information needed to verify the status of the final records. The final checklist tab is a final checklist maintenance. This section gives you a quick info about your project. You need to update the percent of final completed, tentative date of the final submission. There's a remark sections if you have info that somebody may be looking for when they open this tab. An items to be submitted has all the documentation. It needs to be included in CARS and FileNet depending on your contract. Some items have more information tags to help you with your documentation. There's a file comments. New attachments in this section allows you to upload final documents to FileNet with all the proper FileNet tags. So all your files uploaded in this section will have a tag on it, with an FC in front. So and goes into FileNet. It says that it was done through the final checklist, so that all helps with the retention. And then saved attachments, the section on the bottom allows you to view all or the majority of the final documents on the final checklist. Sometimes there's too many documents, so it'll show, you'll have to actually go into FileNet or view materials through the CARS to see the rest of them, but the majority of them will show up there. The final checklist, as-built plans. A full set of plan as-built is needed. These plans need to be complete sets, including the standard drawings. And plan sets larger than the max file size need to be broken down into separate as-built plan sets. And as-built set minor, these are the plans for preventive maintenance projects, and they have a max file size of 300 megabytes. As-built plan set major, these are the new construction, reconstruction, or rehab. They have a 500 megabyte file size. And then a change of this year, or in 2022, is the work and shop drawings. If your project is required to have shop drawings, they needed to be included in the as-built plan set. And the last time I checked the construction records manual, it wasn't clear as to where to put them. But most people have been adding them at the end after the standard drawings, or making a separate as-built working drawings set of plans for those as-builts. Off to the right here is a screenshot of the final checklist in CARS. This is where the final documents and drop-down menu should be uploaded. So there's a place here for file new attachments. You click on choose file, you upload your file there, and then you give it the code that matches the document you're uploading. So then select the proper document name. You can add up to 5 additional files in this new attachments before you have to save them. Otherwise, if you do more than 5, you will lose them. So you'll have to re-upload them. So it's just a little thing that I have learned doing it, that you can only do 5 at a time. PQE seemed to be still the major area of issues going through finals. Review section 4 of the construction records manual. Of all all the required information, including location, date, quantity being paid, and calculations to verify quantity being paid for. That's probably the number one area where people don't have anything, is they don't show the calculations. They just show the endings payment, and you can't verify the quantities. And they'll say, well, we install them as plans, but somebody checking the project doesn't know exactly what the plan totals are, and you can't really verify just off of that. So you need to show your calculations. PQEs that require contractor signatures are flagging, pilot car, water, excavation quantities by field measurements, rock excavation, foundation fill, select backfill, if different from plan, material by load count, and haul summaries. And any other PQE you have a question on whether you should have a signature on, you probably should get a signature. And then when you go to check PQEs, if you're referencing other PQEs for your source documentation, it adds a lot of time to the person checking quantities on those PQEs to have to run back and forth to check the source documentation for calculations. So it's just easier if you have the source documentation with each PQE and make sure all the source documentation are there before submitting the final records. So the person creating the PQE, make sure all the required information and attachments are to verify quantity being paid for. The person checking the PQE should not be the person that created the PQE. This person may be the person submitting the PQE for payment. All PQE should be rechecked and all documentation verified by someone that has not created or previously checked the PQE. The district final check, all quantities, attachments, and documentation should be checked. The LPA or consultant finals can be checked by anybody or district. The district finals, the PQE should be checked by someone who wasn't familiar with the project, just to make sure that there are no questions or comments going through, that everything can be answered. Correspondence, all correspondence and emails should be placed in FileNet. Uploading one large correspondence file at the end of the project is not acceptable. There are still many instances this is being done. Correspondence needs to be uploaded by each date. String emails can be uploaded together, but the entire string needs to be attached. Correspondence should be uploaded through records crawlers, iLinks capture, or through add documents and cars. Project payrolls. All project payrolls should be checked and approved. All B2G now project requirements should be completed. And the project payrolls need to be closed out before the project final comes into the district. If a project has an extended period where no work is taking place, they should be suspended, because the DOT pays for active payrolls on the LTP tracker system. So if you got a winter suspension, you should suspend those payrolls for the winter. Certification manager. Project bid items have a generic list of certifications required for each project. At the beginning of the project, the engineer should review the proposal, special provisions, and plan notes that may require additional certifications and work drawings. These items should be added to the certification manager before sending them out to the contractor. And then certain certifications will be stored in cars and additional spots as well. Materials drop box. All concrete and HMA mixed designs need to be uploaded into the Dropbox as well, because Materials and Research is using this as a data storage base and a way of searching for mix designs. All project test results need to be uploaded as they're completed, including cylinder and beam breaks. Uploading one large materials file at the end of the project is not acceptable. There's still people trying to do that. The test results need to be filed with the date sampled, not the date the test is completed, so the project and district IA test can be found. The LPA and consultant test needs to be uploaded as well. And the HMA daily paving workbooks need to be uploaded in an Excel format. The district materials review for the final records, the following forms need to be submitted to the district materials coordinator for review prior to uploading them to the final checklist. The statement of materials taken from pits, project engineer's report on materials acceptance, summary of aggregate quality tests, and then the pit release and receipt of payment for pits that have those, and the price adjustment worksheet for failing aggregate lots, and any of the HMA paving reports with deductions or incentives should also be submitted so they can review. So this is just a copy of a statement of materials taken from pits that I took from a project from last year and tried to take off project number, PCN, and names. But you can see this project, they had a borrow that came from a private source, but they were given the material for free. So the pit release showed that they had a zero payment on these. Just a generic chip seal, project engineers report of materials acceptance, and you'll see with the new change in the construction records manual, all bid items are supposed to be included now. So the contract bond and the MOB, a lot of people are showing NA or 1 for the contract bond since the invoice goes into the certification manager. And then they're showing NA or 6 for the MOB since it's an automatic payment now. The aggregate quality test summaries, they need to show the specification sieves on them and any physical properties. This one happens to be a class 5 from a project last year. And when I see them, I want to see all 3 tests of that lot and the lot average shown. And then the remarks section is to be shown what happened with the failing aggregate, how you addressed it. And I do like to see spaces between the tests. You don't have to, but that's what I prefer here in Fargo. And then the price adjustment worksheet seems to be forgotten a lot with failing aggregate. This is actually your source documentation for the price deduction. And as you can see, you put all 3 tests in up here, then you get your average, and you take your deviation from your average times 5 gives you 20%. And I just threw a number in of 1,015 ton at $50. For the 20% deduct is a $10,150 deduct for that gravel. And then I just threw in some shale numbers over the 12% allowed just to show how to fill out that. And if you had the failing shale as well, that'd have been a $500 deduct. Once the district materials coordinator reviews all the records to ensure the required information is included on them, these forms may be returned to you for corrections. After the review is complete, the materials coordinator will sign and date the aggregate summaries, and or they may initial the other form showing that they've reviewed them. Once approved, the materials forms can be uploaded into the final checklist. Depending on which district or the materials coordinator's preference, they may be returned to you to be uploaded, or I actually upload them for you in Fargo. And the last area I had was project permits. The project permits need to be closed out before project final records are completed. All project environmental notes from the project permit need to be compiled with. The 404 permit, check with the district engineer or assistant district engineer for the procedures in closing the permit for that district once all the requirements are met. If you have an on-site certification, SFN 61042 needs to be uploaded to the final checklist and completed. And the North Dakota general permit for water permit, to close them out, you need the full copy of the SWIP, which includes the general permit, project maps, project SWIP changes, and inspections, and anything else they did with the SWIP through the course of the project. That all gets uploaded to the final checklist. Then there's the stormwater permit termination checklist that's supposed to be filled out. And depending on which district you're in or how they operate, then you would give that 6504 to the assistant district engineer for their signature, and they close out the permit, or you may end up closing out the permit as a project engineer. Here in Fargo, you do it. So then you need to go to the North Dakota Environmental Quality website and get the notice of termination of the general permit and fill all that out. And then the assistant here in Fargo signs those. And that gets uploaded to the final checklist as well. With that, you guys have any questions?
This is Bernie in the Bismarck district.
Yes.
What I've been doing with my project engineers report is I put stuff on the project engineers report original form that's not in my certification manager. Then I print out my certifications received and attach that to the back. And I put it all as one PDF in there and on the remarks on the title. When I get to the end there, I sign the project engineers report and then say, see attached for items requiring certifications or shop drawings. So I don't have to type out 200 pages of what's already been done for you in cars.
Okay. Yeah, I guess as long as your district is okay with that, but it's, the intent is that they're supposed to go, or someone should go through all those certs and add the additional information so the item can't be paid for until everything is turned in.
Right. That's why the certification report, you can't pay for an item unless you get the certifications.
Yep.
I don't know what other people think about that, but because when it's accepted by certification, well, the only number you put in there is whatever that one is for accepted by certification. Same with shop drawings.
Yeah. It's one of the forms that are being looked at, whether we still need, but as of right now, that's the direction we still have on them.
All right.
And then James had a question in here about the materials coordinator review the certification manual requirements and customize them for the project, adding or deleting the requirements. I guess in the past here in Fargo, the engineers kind of done that for us. And with all the work to have with the rest of the finals and stuff, I kind of like it still done that way, but guess that is technically the procedure for it. Do we have any other questions?
Well-
I tried to hit the rough topics of what gets missed. So,
Yeah, this is Dustin in Grand Forks. I was just gonna say, I mean, it's really a joint effort on that. You know, they give you a baseline or a default, you know, what's needed for acceptance based on the bid item, but like a classic example was a few years ago when we had those high tension cable barriers, because that was such a brand new project. You know, there was stuff in the SP that was not incorporated into the you know, the cert manager. So I actually coordinated with Fargo and Bismarck, because those are the districts that were involved in that type of work that year. And so I think we should lay out you know, a consistent cert manager for acceptance based on what the requirements are saying in the SP. So it's not just engineer, you know, versus materials coordinator. It's a complete effort really by anyone involved on that project. And sometimes you've got to reach across district lines to, you know, formulate a consistent presence, you know, so one engineer in one district says, oh, you don't need any of that stuff, versus another engineer in a different district saying, well, you need all that stuff. So just wanted to comment on that it's a total effort, not just one single person's effort.
is there any more questions? If not, Josh, I think we're done.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Eric and Patrick and Chad. Everything was good. So I'll
I guess
wrap
I was
up.
gonna say-
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say one more thing on that, since we're talking about the cert report. You know, I guess I always lay it bare at the, you know, throughout the job. You know, that's not just because you give it to them at the pre-job doesn't mean that that's the final version of that. You might find stuff as you go along that needs to be added to there. So sometimes you don't have a very good opportunity ahead of the pre-job to get all that stuff in, but you know, that's an evolving document. And then, you know, just as long as the contractor understands that's like, well, you didn't say I needed that, you know, at the pre-job. It's like, well, I didn't, but I'm saying that you need it now.
Dustin, I have the same opinion. At the beginning, I kind of tell them, you know, expect some changes to that, because as I go through the spec book and review stuff, I always find little stuff hidden. So I pretty much send them the blank one that gets imported in there, and you know, it's a good starting point. But there's always stuff that comes up later, so I just make that clear with them.
Thanks, Dustin. Thanks,
Now,
Dan.
now I'm done.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back at it again next week, Thursday from 9 to 11 again. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Josh. Go Duke.
I agree.
Not.